Hey everyone, Cleo here, and welcome to another reading vlog. This is part 2 of the Booktube Prize reading vlog. So for the Octafinals of the Booktube Prize, I am a judge for the translated fiction section, and I think I am in section D. And so I have already read 3 of the 6 books that I need to read for this prize, and so this vlog is going to be for the 3 remaining. But so, for this one, I'm starting out with The Art of Losing by Alice Zenither. Basically, I'm starting with the biggest remaining one in the hope that if I get that one out of the way, I'll have a little bit less stress about completing the 2 other ones. But so, this is an Algerian novel. In this one, we are following 2 generations, it seems, though at this point in time, we're really still in the sort of like past generation. But so we're following a girl called Naima in present-day France. She is of Algerian descent, and then the section that I'm currently reading, so the beginning of the novel, we're actually looking back at 2 generations past. So we're looking at her grandfather Ali, who was living in Algeria at the time and who has witnessed the colonization of Algeria by France. So he was living in a time in which Algeria was colonized by France, and he is also living through a time in which there is, more rebellion towards that. There is a sort of like rise towards independence, and so we're looking at those events. I kind of, at this point in time, wished that we are seeing more like, I would have liked to see an alteration between the 2 timelines, because at this point in time, I kind of like, I've been hinted at about this future perspectives, and from time to time we do get like the link between Naima and her grandfather, and we do find out that she will at some point be looking into the details, the historical details of what her family has lived through. But I kind of wish that we would have had it in an alternating story time. I kind of always prefer to see the past timeline and the present day timeline intermingling rather than have a very chronologic movement through the story where we're now seeing the past timeline, and I'm guessing once that story has been rounded out, we'll move on to present day. So that's kind of like my one comment at this point in time. I'm not fully invested in the past timeline and the story of Ali, but I am getting, like, at times I'm more interested, and I think we're moving on more towards, or at least there are these times in which we are more focused on the storyline of Ali's son Hamid, who is then Naima's father, and those I'm finding already more interested, or I'm already more engaged with those. So yeah, I'll give you an update when I'm a little bit further into the book. Hey guys, so I'm about 100 pages out from finishing it, and like, this book is divided into 3 parts. Each part deals with a generation. So first part was the grandfather, whose perspective I didn't really care too much about, in part because I had gone into this book with different expectations. However, I need to review that opinion, because I was going into the expectations that we're going to follow his granddaughter, and that from time to time we would get glimpses into his history with Algeria. However, I am now in part 3, which is her perspective, and I am so struggling with keeping awake. So that's a sign for me that I'm not really enjoying it. Her perspective is quite passive as well at this point in time, so that could also be it, because she's kind of struggling with dual desires about going back to Algeria or not. So part of her wants to go back to Algeria. On the other hand, she's also afraid of going back to some extent, because she's afraid of what's finally seeing this country, finally being there and experiencing this country will change in her life. It's always been this absence in her life, this absent country, that has been a major impact on her identity, but that in reality she didn't really have, any sort of connection to except for her roots. And so she's kind of afraid of what this is going to do to her. But so as a consequence, she's also trying to kind of stall going there. So her perspective at this point in time is quite passive, and so it's a lot of interviews with an artist from Algeria, rather than anything happening actually. So it's very reflective, which doesn't always need to be a problem, but here it seems to be a problem for me. And it's definitely a problem because I enjoyed the second perspective, her father's perspective, Hamid. I enjoyed that section a whole lot, and in that section I was really going through it a lot quicker. So I was kind of confident that I was going to be able to finish this book today, because I was like, yeah, I need to do like 160 pages, which is more than I have done so far. But I've also been going through it a lot quicker than I was in the beginning, so it's just a little bit of a push. But now I'm like, no, that's definitely not happening, because now I'm really struggling to keep myself to keep myself continuing through it. So I think I'm gonna like still read however much I get into it today, and then I'll take a little bit of a break and get back to it next weekend during Bookathon. All right, so I've just finished The Art of Losing, and I'm gonna kind of stand by part of what I said. So I personally would have just liked it better if we would have had the three generations story intermingle, because I just always like more when we're just like shifting perspectives all the time, rather than starting with a perspective and then kind of banning it, moving to another, and so forth, so on and so forth. So I think for that reason, I would have enjoyed it more if it had kind of gone through the three timelines kind of simultaneously. Of course, that has implications for your writing because it makes the chronology much more complicated. However, and some of the implications of the grandfather's actions on his granddaughter's relationship to her country might be more complex to write that way. But I think, like, for me personally, but that's also like personal preference wise, it would have made a little bit of a difference in my enjoyment. I will definitely say that. So as I said earlier, I really enjoyed the second perspective most, but the third perspective also really grew on me as we were getting through it further, because she does make the decision to go back to Algeria, and once she's on her way to do that, that definitely became more interesting to me, to see her return to Algeria and to see what was happening there and all those things. In total, I feel like there definitely were interesting things being discussed within this book, and definitely also some interesting quotes. The poem The Art of Losing was also very nice, sort of like way for the story to come together, for the story's thematics to come together. I also really liked this sort of section that was about the silence of the grandfather. So his son and his granddaughter never really found out what his actions were in the war, why he had to flee Algeria. And so at some point in time, it talks about silence and about how certain authors might feel that they need to fill in all of these silences, because otherwise there's the risk of others filling in the silence for you. When somebody doesn't speak about their experiences, we as human beings kind of have a tendency to fill in the gaps for ourselves and to come to certain conclusions about what might have happened. So I found that to be an interesting discussion as well, or an interesting observation. But so I'm going to be moving on, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break now. So I'll be back to update you guys over the weekend, when I will be normally finishing out this reading list with the last two books that I have to read for the Booktube prize. So it's the next weekend. It is also Becca's 48-hour Bookathon, and I am continuing with this project. So this weekend I'm planning to read the final two books for the Booktube prize. I'm currently reading Heaven by Miko Kawakami. I am 50 pages into it. I am 50 pages into it. It is about 160 or something like that. So this is a book translated from Japanese. It is a book about bullying, basically. So we have these two characters. The characters whose perspective we're reading from the perspective of the male character. So he is this boy who has a lazy eye, and that in part is why he's being bullied by some of the sort of like popular kids in his school. And then one day he finds a note addressed to him saying that the person writing the note believes that they should become friends. And so a friendship between these two, who both are bullied at school, starts to unravel. So we are at this point like establishing the friendship between these two characters. I will definitely already say that like the bullying is pretty severe, and so if that is a trigger to you, then definitely like be wary of that going into it, because for me it isn't necessarily a trigger, though I definitely don't like reading about it. But some of these early sequences that contain bullying are pretty brutal, and so it's definitely not like, it definitely goes into some heavy bullying. All right, so I finished Heaven, and it's a mixed bag. It's definitely the type of book that opens discussion that, I'm pretty sure people can have very disparate feelings about, but it also opens discussions about certain topics within the story. I think some of the central thematic running through it is this sort of idea of, the strong, the survival of the fittest, basically, and the idea of people who are perceived as weak living in a world that very much favors the strong. And so these bullies are very much the strong people who know what they want and they take what they want, and they don't really care about whether it's right or wrong, because that's not really what they're thinking about. They're just thinking about, this is what I want and I'm strong enough to take what I want. And then the people who are perceived as weak, who might not have that power, but just as likely have that power but don't want to use that power. And so that is one of the central themes running through this book. And I thought that that was very interesting to look at, and so in that sense, I feel like this book opens itself up to discussion, or it really is something that you need to sit on and kind of think about your experience afterwards, because it doesn't come with any sort of clear-cut answers or any sort of like revelation towards the end of what answer the author is trying to portray within this book. It's just offering you perspectives, and you kind of need to sit on it and think through it afterwards. Another central element to the story is his disability. So he was born, or at least at the age of 3 or something, he had a lazy eye, and probably he was born with it. He doesn't really remember anything from before that time. But so he has a lazy eye, and he believes that that is the reason why he has been singled out, why people are bullying him. And so as a consequence, of course, he has quite a lot of internalized ableism regarding the way he looks, regarding his eye. He's very sensitive to the use of the term eye. Somebody even refers to eyes and he becomes very anxious. Even though, I feel very conflicted about the representation here, because definitely internalized ableism is a thing. I mean, I have an invisible disability and I have a lot of internalized ableism as well. And so it's definitely going to be the case. It's definitely like relatable, the idea that he would have internalized ableism about, the way that he looks, especially if he perceives it being linked to the way that he's been treated, the way that he's been bullied. And I really liked the way that his newfound friend treats him and his disability. But we are also, throughout the story, looking at the boundaries between disability and identity, and the impact that a disability has on your identity. How much does your disability determine your identity? And I thought that that is very interesting, a very interesting thematic running through this story. But I am not entirely sure that I like the ending to this story, both in terms of the whole weak versus strong sort of thematic, and in terms of this look at disability. Basically, I kind of felt like the book landed on a really good spot when it came to disability, identity, and that whole sort of thematic. And then it took decisions, or it took turns that I feel give the impression of a different message being sent. And they kind of fall in line with certain stereotypes, certain stereotypical evolutions of storylines with disabled characters. So, not really liking that ending to the story. And also, when it comes to the whole sort of like bullying resolution, the idea of the weak versus the strong, and the way that we left off that sort of thematic discussion, I'm not entirely sure. Definitely what should also be mentioned is that this story is taking place in sort of like middle school, and these kids do not feel like middle school kids. And you could definitely say for the kids who are being bullied that they have had to age up really quickly, because the type of bullying, the type of abuse that they are exposed to is extreme. And I will absolutely tell you guys, not to read it if you have triggers for bullying especially, but there's also definitely triggers for suicidal thoughts, for sexual assaults, and probably for some more, but the bullying scenes are really brutal. It's very difficult to read through some of them. And one concern maybe is also that I didn't really have an emotional connection to the characters. So even though I have an emotional link to this character because of having a disability, and a lot of his thoughts about his disability growing up are thoughts that I have also had at that point in time, not the suicidal ones. And that internalized ableism that he's experiencing is definitely also that I, at a certain level, have felt. But at no point did I really feel an emotional connection to me. The impact of the book really lay in the descriptions and in imagining kids doing this type of things to other kids. Never mind kids, any sort of human being doing that sort of action to another human being. But I wasn't more impacted because of the fact that I was reading from this particular perspective, for example, which can be a choice, of course, because this way our characters can represent any person who has been bullied. It does not necessarily have to be this individual story of somebody being bullied. So yeah, I'm conflicted there. It's a very interesting book to think about, to talk about. I think it would be a very good book club book because I think you can have really interesting discussions about this book afterwards. And I am definitely happy that I read it. I definitely also did enjoy it. It's definitely like 3 stars and up. Just not entirely sure where it's falling. In terms of the order of what I've read so far, I'm debating whether it's definitely The Membrane stays on top. And then I'm debating whether this one beats out Khalil or whether Khalil beats out this one, because with both of them, I had like a high level of interest and investments, and it didn't fully pan out. So I'll sit on those a little bit longer. All right, 8 o'clock. We're ready to jump into another book. I haven't finished my other one yet, but hey, that doesn't matter for this vlog. So we are reading My Heart by Zenite, and I've forgotten the last name again, but I'll have it on the screen. So this is a book translated from Bosnian, and so it is about this guy, I think he's in his 50s or so. He has just suffered a cardiac arrest, and he is reflecting back on his life, and a part of what he's going to be reflecting on is the Bosnian War. I don't know too much about that, and so I'm interested in reading this book and finding out more. Hopefully this is going to be like a banger to end on. It is once more a book that has a war thematic, and so that could potentially go wrong, but I am still optimistic about this one. I'm optimistic. We'll see whether that's correct or not. Hey guys, so I'm like a quarter of the way into My Heart, and like content-wise, there's not more than I can say except for what the premise has been. But in terms of the style, I'm really enjoying this a whole lot so far. So really liking the writing style, the narrative voice. We are reading in first-person perspective, which I think works really well for a reflective novel like this. And in terms of the sort of like timeline, we definitely have a more complicated timeline where, I'm sometimes like, wait, where are we now? Because we are looking back. So first of all, we have present day, then we're looking back at a trip he made with his son, in which he was like randomly traveling around the US. And then he's also sometimes thinking back to the time when he came from Bosnia over to the US in 1995. And then I'm guessing at some point we're also gonna look back on what came before that, what came during the Bosnian War. So very much enjoying that aspect to it. This is kind of what I wanted out of The Art of Losing. I much prefer the intermingling of timelines when it comes to a novel like this, when it comes to historical fiction. So yeah, I'm very much enjoying that structure for the moment. So for My Heart, I don't know. I like the writing style, and I enjoy sort of like the structuring of it and the concept as well. But I'm missing something. I'm just really not that engaged with it. So as I said, I was kind of looking at different timelines. So basically the story is divided into 3 sections, which are like snippets of his life. But in each of these snippets, he will also be constantly like thinking back on certain things that have happened that are somehow connected to what is happening. But it's very much focusing on sort of like the small things in life, the small acts in life that have a huge impact. Though some of them can be super huge. At one point, for example, he mentioned something about being held at gunpoint, but it's like one sentence only, and then it just like moves on from there. So it's not like we're getting like a huge overview of what happened to them during the Bosnian War, for example. But the Bosnian War is definitely also something that had a huge impact and that does come back throughout the story. But so yeah, it definitely is a reflection of this guy philosophizing about his life, thinking back on small memories, bigger memories. The middle section is very much about the father-son relationship and about these sort of like differences between people who have left their home countries versus the next generation who has become more integrated into their new country and who might feel a little bit more at home there versus the place that they left when they were small children. And so there are definitely interesting elements, there are different interesting points being brought up, but I'm just not really super engaged with it. So I'm enjoying it, but if this were like fully up to me now, I would probably DNF at this point because I'm just not enjoying it enough. But so yeah, I'm gonna continue and let's see whether this book can pack a punch. Because what I will say is that in spite of the fact that, or maybe because we're only looking at these small little snippets, I do very much feel for our protagonist and for what is happening in the third section of this book. But I'm not going to go into that because that would be spoilers. But yeah, I do have an emotional bond to the people within this story, even though there is no big discussion of big feelings, or very rarely. Still, you get to know him to such a level that you definitely do feel for him lots. Alright, so I finished My Heart, and I mean, it really had its beautiful moments, but I wasn't totally there for all of it, and I missed some sort of a cohesion to the whole. Um, so maybe, like with the other stories, I would have more enjoyed that rather than we're looking at three time periods that were intermingling all of them, or that were like rounding out the story in the end where all three timelines are connected to one another again. But so yeah, let's do my ranking because potentially this vlog is already way too long. If it is, then maybe I'll do my ranking in a different video. So last place has to go to Goethe because there's only really one section I liked about Goethe, and it was from one particular perspective from which we read maybe like 2 chapters in the entire book. For the rest, it was definitely too much telling, not enough showing, and I really quite struggled with that one. Fifth place will go to The Art of Losing by Alice Zenither. Mainly because I really struggled with the beginning because the first perspective was my big problem there, and so it took a while to get into it. I did enjoy the second perspective and the third as well, and there definitely were interesting things about it, but yeah, not enough to really make it an enjoyable read for me. Fourth place is more difficult. So the spots 1 to 4 are basically books that I enjoyed, and I'm debating between spots 3 and 4 here. And I'm gonna put in spot 4 My Heart. Yeah, I'm gonna put it there. I enjoyed it, and as I said, it had beautiful language and it was really moving, and there were definitely a lot of sections in which I was like really there for it, and I was just like fully taken along on the ride. But then there were also quite a lot of passages that felt a little bit more like you know, random in there because we're looking at so many small moments from their lives. And so some of those moments are so small that they seem to be in there for no particular reason. And not everything needs to be there in the book for a reason, of course, but I just had too many times in which I was like, okay, that's just like a random day in their life, and that it didn't really build to anything. So it was very slice of life, and I do enjoy slice of life, but it missed something for me. And then in third spot, that means I'm gonna put Khalil by Yasmina Khadra. I really enjoyed this one, and it had a really interesting premise that I was very much down for, but it didn't fully deliver for me. I felt like we were starting on a high point and the book just kept on like going lower and lower because we're getting so much anxiety in the beginning and we kind of lose that as the story progresses. And so I felt like the beginning and the premise really carried that book, and so towards the ending of the book it kind of lost me. Second place will go to Heaven by Miko Kawakami. I was kind of thinking that my heart would maybe take that spot, but in the end, I really wasn't interested enough. Heaven had a really beautiful language. There were definitely a few passages that I highlighted, so like I dog-eared a few pages because I thought they were just so well formulated. She just really has a beautiful way with language. But ultimately, this book also didn't fully come together for me, and it was like a tiny bit of a disappointment just because I had had such high expectations for it. I think I really liked the language in it, but the story didn't fully pan out for me. And you know, I felt like certain things didn't, like the story didn't have a satisfying ending basically. And then so in number one spot I am going to be putting The Membranes by Chitawe. This is also a book that I was intrigued about before I joined this Booktube prize. So this and Heaven were basically the two books that were on my want to read list on Goodreads, and I'm very happy that I got to prioritize The Membranes. I really enjoyed it a whole lot. It's the only book of these six by which I really had that sort of like amazing feeling of like, yes, I love this book. This book is giving me everything I want and more. It's the book I knew least about going into almost, because it is just such a wild ride and it's just a premise that you cannot really speak about too much. And basically it's a sort of book that also, if you reread it after having finished it, you will have a different experience because of what you uncover towards the ending of the book. So it's kind of a book in which the ending gives a whole new perspective on what you've been reading thus far, and on the conclusions that you've made about the book. And so as a consequence, it is a book that you can reread and get more out of. So yeah, that is going to be my number one spot. I don't remember how many books make it onto the next rounds, but in any case, for my top four, I would be happy to see them pass on, but I definitely want to see The Membranes go through to the next round because that is a real standout from this experience. Hey guys, it is 1st of July, no, 1st of June. It's the 1st of June and I've just seen the results for my subsection of the prize and I am so not happy. So the books that are going through are My Heart, are Heaven, and The Art of Losing. So you can guess the main reason why I'm not happy is because The Membranes, where's The Membranes? I absolutely love The Membranes, and like The Membranes was so far and above all the others in that category to me that I could have done with, you know, my two least favorite going through as long as The Membranes also went through. So I would have been less upset if that had been the case, versus now having two of my four favorites in there, but not having my absolute favorite in there. So I am a little bit upset, but you know, it's fine. It's the majority rule. I don't know how many people judge. I think it is like 6 around or maybe 5. I know one other person in the round was also in the live chat when we were seeing the results, and she also said that The Membranes was her number one. So I'm guessing it must have been a really divisive book. This also happened last year. Last year there was a book that I really despised that made it through, and it's and I think Robert and you know, commented on it afterwards that there was like a huge division amongst the judges about that one particular book, so that it like just made it through. And I'm guessing in this case there will have been a huge division, which will have meant that it just didn't make it through. I'm hoping, because with 2 of the 5 or 6 judges giving it number one spot, it must have been pretty close. But so yeah, I am a little bit upset, but still, I just needed to film this clip and insert it because I'm not happy with that result. But okay, I'm back to past Clio to sign off this video. But so, I'm gonna take a break from the Booktube prize for the next 2 months, but I should be back to judge it in the months of August and September, and so that will be the final round, and that will be the finalists, and I'm hoping to see The Membranes in those finalists. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you guys for the next one. Bye!